let's go ahead and start this session. This session is one of those sessions where we talk about a cross-cutting issue when it comes to urban areas, and that is what is going to happen in urban areas in terms of the way in which we access goods, in which we access recreation facilities, restaurants, the ways in which we pay for housing, pay for offices, those markets that are evolving and that are essential to the livelihood of urban areas. And of course, during COVID, these urban areas, all these sectors, the retail sector, the restaurant sector, the real estate sector, have been profoundly disrupted, perhaps only temporarily, perhaps for the longer term. And this is one of the things that we'll be discussing today. There are a number of temporary changes in terms of the loss of activity, the shift in activity that occurred during the lockdown, but there are also a lot of new behaviors that were adopted, and how much of those behaviors or how many of those behaviors will remain will have an important, will play an important role in all of these sectors, in retail, restaurants, and real estate. Now, if we were to think about the different areas where we've seen these impacts, we can think, of course, of the teleworking, the impact of telework in two ways. One, because it delocalized office work away from central business districts and office buildings to home areas. And that means that, for example, shops that depended and restaurants that depended on having a lot of workers in one area during the day certainly saw many fewer workers during the day and may see fewer going forward. There's also the relocalization of activities that's linked to teleworking away partly from these business districts to residential districts. So new opportunities for retail shops and for restaurants as well, and impacts on real estate markets. E-commerce was already a large disruptor in the sector before COVID. COVID accelerated the impact of e-commerce. And I think the real question here is what will be the balance of brick and mortar versus click and electron in the post-COVID, during the recovery of from COVID and in the post-COVID area. And here there are a lot of questions that relate to, with the rise of e-commerce, what will be the new logistics patterns and what will be the logistic needs and distribution needs that will be required to fulfill a increase in e-commerce activity. And of course, that depends on how much of an increase we're talking about and how much of the increase that we saw during COVID actually remains. But we did see the creation of neighborhood distribution hubs in some very unusual instances in cafes and local shops as people were ordering online and having to have these goods distributed to them, even if they weren't being distributed directly to their homes. We also saw the rise of dark stores, these kind of hubs where fulfillment took place in real time and otherwise spaces that were used for other purposes. Restaurants and other third spaces, these third recreation and service-oriented spaces, we know that because of the sanitary rules during the successive lockdowns, those places suffered immensely. They pivoted quite rapidly to a takeaway and delivery model. How much of that will remain? How many of those new behaviors that people became accustomed to during COVID in terms of ordering out will stay? We saw the rise of dark kitchens that were fulfilling many restaurants using some changes in real estate prices to be able to centralize those kitchen facilities and fulfill different menus from, again, locations that had never seen that kind of activity before. And linked to this food distribution economy or meal distribution economy, we saw the rise of delivery services, of the street waiter that takes up, of course, space, but also has to find a way to get around in cities in ways that are new in many cases, using cycling, scooters, moped scooters, and in some cases cars. And finally, the impact on real estate. Now here, I think we can differentiate between commercial and shop real estate. And here, the real battlefield, both during COVID and especially after COVID, is ground floor commercial space. This is the space that's most under pressure, and this is the space where there's a lot of questions as to what the recovery pathway might look like. These spaces were battered, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic. They were sometimes emptied. They were sometimes repurposed. We'll hear about that and how cities are helping to accompany shop owners and artisans in that area. Office real estate, of course, it was emptied as telework was imposed for those who could telework. Clearly, if part of that telework remains, then those office spaces are overspecified and oversupplied potentially in many areas. So what then becomes of the commercial value of that space and the value of alternative uses of that space? That's something to consider going forward. And finally, as I said, there is a lot of, with the delivery economy and with this on-demand interaction with services, the new role for warehouses and hubbing in commercial spaces, in commercial areas, sorry, rather in urban areas that had not seen that before. So those are the main challenges that we can see emerging in this space: retail, restaurants, real estate. There is perhaps a revolution underway. And to do that, I'm going to turn to 4 speakers who will provide different perspectives on many of those questions. And those speakers I'll introduce now, and then they'll successively give their speeches. So Joost Koomen is Secretary General of the European Council of Shopping Places. This is a new pan-European organization that represents an industry that designs, creates, funds, develops, builds, and manages places anchored by retail across Europe. After Joost's introduction, we'll turn to Isabelle Maurizi. She is Head of Sustainability and Environment at EuroCommerce. EuroCommerce is the voice for 6 million retail, wholesale, and other trading companies. It does this by being a platform for the sector, to communicate about the role of the sector, and to advocate for the sector's interests. Following Isabelle, we'll have Pauline Sammarcelli. She works for communication at the SEMAEST, based in Paris. The SEMAEST is a private public entity involving the city of Paris, whose main mission is to revitalize and support local shops, innovative neighborhood commerce, and independent artisans, all this since 1982, so much, much before the COVID pandemic. And finally, we'll round out this discussion, or these opening presentations rather, with Giacomo Lozzi. He is Senior Manager, Project Manager at the POLIS Network, one of the co-organizers of this conference. He is, among many other things, Coordinator for Urban Freight at POLIS. So as you can see, we have 4 experienced professionals that can relate their experience and what they're observing in this area of the way in which the COVID-19 pandemic has battered, has impacted these 3 essential activities in urban areas: retail, restaurants, real estate. Joost, I'm going to turn to you. Is there a revolution underway? Please provide us your input from of the European Council of Shopping Places. Joost, the floor is yours. And I'll ask that the slide be put up in the background, please.
Philippe, first of all, thank you very much for that that introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you on this panel today with a very very relevant topic: revolution or evolution brought upon us by the pandemic. But before I go into that, let me just first I want just to briefly mention and talk about the role of shopping places or marketplaces, or agoras, as they once used to be known in the ancient times, communities. I think it's important to remind that these places of commerce, so to speak, have always been very, very important for communities. They've always been much more than just places where you could buy and sell things. I mean, they really, shopping places, marketplaces really have always been hubs of socialization, if you like, and really, and quite often being the heart and soul of a community. And so the buildings that host these places, be they inside a city center and a residential area, out of town, where have you, they therefore, they've played a very important anchor function, if you like, and being the anchor of such a shopping place, such a marketplace, and its surroundings. And you see then increasingly as when you look at newer developments or newer real estate shopping place developments, they're increasingly mixed use, which means that in addition to shops, bars, restaurants, nowadays what you see increasingly is that they provide a whole range of other activities, functions, leisure, medical facilities, housing, offices, utilities, you name it. And so, but still quite often the retail, the shopping, the bar, the restaurant is very important, an important anchor point there in such a new mixed use development. I think also the important thing to mention is, of course, buildings are, are a physical reality, and simply because that reason for people, the people that use in this building, that go through this building, they have a strong emotional impact on them. And yeah, this impact can be, sometimes very positive, sometimes of course very negative, but there is a relationship created there, and I think that's an emotion is triggered. I think that's an important thing to mention and to remind people of. Shopping places obviously therefore have quite a lot of space they occupy in Europe. It's about 116 million square meters that is occupied more or less by our members. It's the size equivalent to the size of the region of Brussels if you add up all the numbers from the different European countries. But nevertheless, given all this, and the companies and organizations that you just mentioned that are involved in this designing, building, managing, funding these buildings, they're not so, they're not very well known to the wider audience. They're certainly not known as many famous retail brands are known. And I think that was also definitely one of the reasons that last year we decided to set up these organizations to be able to represent the sector better and to give it a better voice and visibility. But obviously last year was the COVID year, perhaps not the best year to start such an organization. Of course, as you already mentioned, has been a very, very tough year for everyone. It can safely be said, I think, that for the entire retail ecosystem, it has been pretty devastating. It for sure has had a very negative impact on the vibrancy of communities, as you already mentioned. And let me detail a little bit what I mean with that when I want to speak about vibrancy. For me, I want to, for today, I'd like to break it down in two brackets, so to speak. One bit is the social vibrancy. Shopping places, they attract huge numbers of visitors, many more than tourist destinations. I often use the example of the Louvre. The Louvre, before the pandemic, is the #1 tourist destination in Europe. It has about 10 million visitors per year. And that's the same as your, an average regular provincial shopping center also easily has 10 million visitors per year. A big one in Paris, well over 15 million. And as a sector on whole, we really welcome billions of people every year. So of course, and these people, they come to shop, to drink, to pass through, but obviously they create, because of these enormous numbers, enormous vibrancy by them, just by simply being there. And which has obviously huge impact on the communities that these places are located in, and are very important for the livelihood of this place, as you already mentioned in your introduction. And of course, very obvious to everyone that without this, clearly any communities were not the same. I mean, I think if you look at and you look at it in numbers, our members track these things, and on average footfall, as it's called, was down with 50% across Europe last year. Was also shown that immediately when there was a lifting or an opening up of a lifting of restrictions, that these numbers came back. And if you now look this year now with countries opening up a bit in May, for example, you look at France, Italy, Spain. Footfall numbers in that sense are positive. People are coming back, but of course it's still below 2019 or below before the pandemic. There's still some recovery to be had there, and will it ever be the same? That's a very good question you asked there. As I said, on talking about vibrancy, I broke it down social vibrancy. The other element I would like to focus on is economic vibrancy. First and foremost, obviously employment. We as a sector indirectly employ about 6 million people, and of course, although mass redundancies over the last year have been relatively limited, still many thousands of people lost their jobs. And once all the government support that is still out there is stopped, there is a risk that many more might lose their jobs. And it's also important to remind us that these are often the kind of jobs that are low entry, and the people that lose them will often have disproportionately hit in terms of finding new jobs. So that this is really, of course, a very important, very negative, very sad consequence for economic vibrancy. In terms of financial impact, specifically looking at our own sector, it has been huge, average of 25 to 30% loss in rental income over last year. For those members that we have that are listed at the stock markets, they lost between 50 to 75% of their share price in the first lockdown. Obviously, specifically for retail property, there was very little support from governments. Luckily, there was support for, to a certain extent, for our tenants. Although often we were also kind of expected to support our tenants ourselves, which we happily did. But at the same time, obviously, our members themselves increasingly getting squeezed between, you know, the banks on one hand, the investor on one hand, and the tenants on the other hand. So financially situation, it was still was difficult, is still quite difficult, has a very negative consequence for the value of properties, as you already mentioned. And that in itself has important consequences, of course. It has important consequences for example, if you think of, you know, pension funds, other institutional investors that historically have invested quite a lot in retail property. The decrease of retail value or value of a shopping place, often as it has this anchor function, has a negative impact on the value of other real estate in the surroundings. And this in itself can have, you know, pretty important consequence for local authorities that, of course, will receive less, and sometimes much less property tax at a moment in time when their own budgets are already pretty stretched. So yeah, it's very clear that COVID has been really a direct attack on the vibrancy of the communities. Not even mentioning the home office and homework and the impacts that will have and how that can have it going forward. And yeah, and has maybe it's too soon to say, but some certain evolutions that I will get onto now might have become or will become revolutions. And going to them, if you look at them, some trends that were ongoing already, and I mentioned a few: place making, destination destination retail, meaning that increasingly the focus was really on making, you know, a shopping place not just a place where you can shop, but also really a destination to attract more people, because that's also what consumers increasingly want. Increasingly mixed use, as already mentioned, that's definitely the trend that will continue. Multi-purpose buildings, anchored by retail, but providing a lot of other functions. It's also very interesting, and I think definitely the future. These things had already in itself been triggered by, of course, an increase in e-commerce and the impact that's having on the retail sector, retail property. And I think, you know, if you really look at the future, you know, other things that are already, you know, presenting themselves and be very important is, of course, the whole discussion around, you know, the green transition and the impact that will have on the built environment, the impact it will have in the retail sector. Both, the entire retail ecosystem will have to mitigate as well as adapt to climate change too. Mobility plays an important role here, and also therefore e-commerce in that sense. A new bit, you know, already we have seen last year, I would say almost a relative explosion in terms of the development of omni-channel. That is surely, you know, a trend that was already there, but has been, I'd say, becoming much more mainstream now, and is also being adapted by much smaller retailers, whereas it was used before the crisis mainly by, let's say, very large retail organizations, particularly in the fashion business. And of course, you know, how as a shopping place, as a property place, how we're gonna you know, provide, facilitate these developments. And I think there, in terms of omni-channel, in terms of warehousing, in terms of being a place, you know, also looking at the transition for energy generation potentially going forward. I think there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of things there that that will come. It's maybe too soon to speak yet of a revolution, but surely certain trends have been accelerated. The coming green transition will accelerate some of them even more, and will mean that in 10 years from now, in that sense, the built environment, the shopping place, the property behind it will will look quite differently, and we'll have to play a different role. And I think also that it's also important really to look at this, and I want to conclude with this, to really see it as a as that it provides opportunity to rethink really the role of buildings play in the entire wider urban ecosystem and also urban regeneration.
For that overview. I think you've raised a number of issues, and I'd like to unpack a few of them. I'll just follow up with one or two right now, and then we'll come back to these. So clearly, you're painting the picture of a sector that is bruised, for sure, by this pandemic. You're also indicating that some of these trends that were accelerated during the pandemic were already at play. And so the pandemic was a catalyst for some of those. You represent a wide range of different types of retailers. In my mind, what you've just discussed is a broad environment in which there are likely some retailers, or rather retailing models, that might be more resistant to the kind of challenges that have emerged during the COVID pandemic versus others that are less resistant. And I wonder, from your perspective, if you can give any insight on what those models might be. Are there retailing models that better weathered the storm? And what are those? And are there lessons there for other retailers?
Yeah, no, thank you, Philip. I mean, in terms of retail models that better weather the storm, of course, there was obviously it's not a broad brush in the sense that obviously some bits of the retail industry have fared very well last year. That of course had to very simply often do with the fact that they were allowed to open and others not. So of course supermarkets and others have had a tremendous year, and some other non-food retail has also done very well. I think in terms of business model, I think obviously the omni-channel model, and it's not new in itself. It has been around for a couple of years, but I think what is definitely
You might want to describe or explain what the omni-channel model is for those who don't know.
Yeah, sorry, that's a good one. So basically, it's basically that you, as a retailer, you enable your customers to purchase the goods via multiple channels, of course, in store, but also online, and also to create, let's say, an easy way to shift between them. So you buy something, you order something online, you buy it in store, or you buy it in store, but you cancel online. So basically, you use all the channels of sales available, and you offer also certainly that in a streamlined package to your client, to your customer. And that has been around for quite a while. It's relatively new still, but a couple of years. Was mainly used by large global retailers also because, of course, there's some upfront investment there was necessary. But last year, you've seen it's been adopted by many smaller local retailers too, often because that was the only way that they could sell at least some of the products. You've seen a lot of new, let's say, companies that have set up to facilitate those, or to kind of organize the distribution side, etc., the web hosting, etc., the online ordering. So these things have enabled, and often small retailers to do that too, because of course they could not invest themselves in the capacity to do. That's why it was only done by very large retailers before. So I think that is there to stay. And I think as a retail property sector, and of course what is interesting now, and Sam, you see the properties are also seeing what role they can play. There's certainly in terms of warehousing, delivery, and in terms of pickup opportunities, centralize that. Which, if you think of going further, of course, these things will also become very important when you talk about the future of mobility, green transition. Is how do you organize that? Is it so efficient? It's so good that that the delivery is always one-on-one to each and every house everywhere. How could we improve on that? So obviously, as a property, you're looking at, okay, how can I improve that? And another side is that what you see starting now among some of my members, that they are certainly those that are more active in, let's say, the shopping malls, shopping centers, is that they are, increasingly offering a digital experience. So basically, they'll offer a digital version of their place, and people can both shop in the digital shopping center as well as, of course, in the physical. Now it's open again. And so that's really, I think, a business model that was there already, but it's it's to stay. People have many more people have tried and tested it last year, and we're pleased with it. And I think that that will not that will stay there. Again, it will be further impacted, influenced, and I think streamlined, specifically by the whole debate that we're going to have about green transition and the role of buildings there and the role of mobility there, and of course the whole role of consumerism, if I can use that word, in that ecosystem, and how that is organized, and how it will have to mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change, as I already said.
Absolutely. I know that we have a question already in the Q&A asking about some of the sustainability issues to consider, especially for out-of-town shopping centers. I'm going to come back to that question after we hear from Isabelle. Isabelle, thank you, Joost, for that opening set of comments. It really sets the stage. It raises a lot of the issues that we'll come back to, and I'm sure that Isabelle will also pick up on. So, Isabelle, Maurizi, the floor is yours. Just to remind everyone, you are Head of Sustainability and Environment at EuroCommerce. Isabelle, à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, and good afternoon and good morning. I think it's worldwide, this event. So thank you for giving me the floor. I think a lot of what I'm going to say will echo what Joost has mentioned, because we are close in the ecosystem we're working on. So as mentioned, our EuroCommerce represents retailers and wholesalers, and to put some perspective, what does it mean in terms of sector, is to show that it's quite important within the European Union. It's a big but disparate and differentiated sector. We represent one enterprise in 4 in Europe, 99% of them being small and medium enterprise. That represent the 5th of the European GDP. And we account for 1/3 of total household consumption. I will just not try to just put too much number, but the idea is just to showcase that it's quite an important sector. And as mentioned, it has an impact on people's life and lifestyle. In terms, another perspective that I would like to have here is the fact that the sector provides food and non-food. So it means, and especially in a post-COVID area, we will have this kind of tale of 2 cities, in a way that you have the essential and non-essential commerce, and that will have different impacts on how the experience was lived by the sector. But what does that mean in terms of urbanism and relationship to the city, what retailers and wholesalers are doing? So first of all, it's just providing products in one place. So having the opportunity to just have the choice of a broad range of products and services that are available at a given place. That also implies some delivery challenges, some logistics approach that I think will be discussed, and I'm happy to go into that detail later on. Another items that I would like to highlight is also to fight some preconceived notion about where retailers and wholesalers are. It's not only in historic city centers, but also in the inner and first periphery and in suburban areas. So in terms of approach to the cities, that will have a different approach. This is due to the fact that the sector is not leading urban planning, but we are following it. So there are shops where there is the business case to have a shop and a city center, in a city center. So beyond only access, it's also a problem of security, a problem of real estate, and so on and so forth. It's just to put it in a global perspective. So up till February 2020, the idea was we deliver food to your canteens if you're B2B, medicines to your pharmacies, we deliver goods in your fashion shops or in your supermarket, and well, COVID happened. And the numerous and successive lockdowns have, in my view, emphasized two mainstream, which is one responding to higher requirement for sustainability in a way that maybe a general context of a search of a better quality of life in urban area. We have seen some trends in the consumption patterns that are threefold. One is request for more value for money. Secondly, maybe lifestyle-driven growth in terms of consumption. So healthy, shorter supply chain, local and environmental friendly products. And in addition to the sustainability aspect, I think definitely the strengthening of the trend of digitalization. E-commerce raise in the consumption habits. Now, 2/3 of European adults have made an online purchase in the last year. So then it depends on countries. In Nordic countries, it's 80%. Eastern European countries, like in Romania and Bulgaria, it's around a quarter. But generally speaking, you have the strengthening of using online. So both in terms of using platform and also omnichannel. So omnichannel, as mentioned, is the fact that you can browse online for your pair of jeans, go to the shop to try it on, and decide it, not being too sure, going home and then send it back to the logistics center. So it's really using all of the different tools that are available. But so it's not only using platforms, but also using omnichannel, and it's definitely being increased in the younger generation. So people around less than 35 years old, 80% of them have been purchasing online. And of course, I shouldn't say it, of course. This number decreased depending on the age. So that's what I would say, the two main trends that have been triggered, which I believe has highlighted even more the challenges into how do we work with city center? How do we ensure that increased direct selling does not have too much impact on traffic? And what's in it for for all of the different stakeholders? What I would like to highlight, if I had three messages, was that there's a need to appropriate logistic and better accessibility, both for the delivery but also for the users. So it means that it's pedestrian zones are extremely welcome because it's a better quality of life, but it also needs to be understood that the people will carry their own goods, that those goods will need to be delivered. So we need to ensure that the trucks or the delivery vans have an appropriate place to park, which is kind of down to the earth, but quite important. I think another important issue is to have predictable urban mobility planning. So ensuring that decision to have UVRs, or more specifically low emission zone, is also taken into the context that it takes time to renew the fleet, that sometimes the fleet, there's the technical possibility to just go beyond diesel trucks. So this predictability is quite important. And last but not least, and I think it's a challenge for everyone, is how do we engage all of the different stakeholders? We have seen that usually low emission zone areas are actually beneficial for the retail sector. But we also see that when it's announced, the retailers are the first one not to be willing to have it. And I think as consumer and citizen, we've always seen it. And for those who are in Brussels, I remember going to a street specifically saying that they didn't want a specific tram, but you can see that I think it's just showcased that there is a resistance to change that I think could be overcome with more appropriate stakeholder involvement. I think that's all what I wanted to highlight. I'm happy to go into further detail, especially regarding the challenge of accessing city center and dealing with the last mile delivery. But I'd rather leave the space for questions and answers.
Isabelle, Thank you for that, and you built on some of the things that Joost was, and brought in some new aspects as well that Joost presented. There are two questions in the Q&A that I'd like to combine and ask you on, and those relate specifically to some of the sustainability and environmental impacts of different modes of retail distribution and shopping. On the one hand, we know that shopping centers at the periphery and less dense urban areas are almost exclusively serviceable by motor vehicles, by cars, sometimes with public transport connections, but they tend not to be certainly as dense or as high quality as in the center of cities. So you have a location pattern that incentivizes use. Now, I know that there is research showing that the ultimate impact on CO2 or energy use differs depending on how people actually get to local shops, for example. So clearly the context matters and individual behaviors matter, but we do see as well some of these shopping centers, less in Europe, more North America, because of this car-centric design, partly because of this car-centric design failing and becoming these empty white elephants that recently are now becoming vaccinodromes, where people get vaccines because there's a lot of space available because the shops aren't there. But so that's one thing. How do we reconcile the kind of shopping offer, the retail offer that is in low density areas with some of these sustainability prerogatives, keeping in mind that shopping patterns may be changing as well? You know, I said that people are maybe working more from home now, so maybe they will want to access shops that are closer to home. Those may or may not be those shops, and they may or may not want to go out to the shops on the weekend. But the other focus, and I'm sorry to heavily load this question, is that micro deliveries, so these small on-demand e-commerce type deliveries, consume a lot of energy, a lot of packaging, a lot of resource waste, and also trigger a lot of return cycles. So returns of merchandise and sending out again of merchandise, both because of missed deliveries, but also because the size wasn't the right one. Though in those instances, it seems that it's better to actually centralize those, maybe even to some of these more peripheral areas where people can access it more easily. There's a lot of balls in the air. The clear preference for a younger population for micro deliveries that has come out of the COVID pandemic, a clear preference for these mega, or a certain preference for these mega shopping malls in lower density areas before the pandemic. How do you view that playing out from a sustainability perspective?
How? So I just want to repeat that we're not the urban planners. So I mean, the retailers and wholesalers are going where there is the business opportunity to go. And I think the shopping center where we can see that we're going back from this trend of having the shopping center in some suburban areas, which doesn't say necessarily that that solve the issue, but that's one thing that I wanted to state. I think when it comes to sustainability, it's always finding a trade-off. So trying to see where we can actually have an influence and where we can. So in terms of how the retail and wholesalers are working on, is that they're looking first at their own operation, or looking at where they can improve the energy efficiency of their own operation. And it's usually first of all on the building. So how do we improve the energy efficiency of the building, which is, electricity, using of air conditioning that is more efficient, and so on and so forth. The second area is how do we work with peers to kind of improve the sustainability of the product we sell, and in that case, it's more about how do we get to sustainable food, but also to ensure that we design the products in a more circular manner. And I think that's where some impact could happen. When it comes, but in your shopping mall, you had another questions on individual cars, aspect of it.
Individual cars, yeah.
Well, that will depend on the driving patterns. If you only go by yourself with your individual cars, you will have more impact than if it's a share car or and so on and so forth. And it's a matter of individual behavior. But indeed, that could be help with better access to public transport, or having ensures that this shopping mall is also linked to other facilities and making the shopping experience part of a cultural experience where you also go to the cinema or the restaurants next door. I think it's a matter of ensuring that it's also combined and balanced, I would say.
I think there's an interesting parallel between, on the one hand, a lot of retailers moving to this omni-channel retail model, but on the other hand, shopping areas not being omni-mode. And so there's probably, we do see some examples of this in the Netherlands, in Denmark, in Germany, where there is a lot more thought put into providing many more accessibility options for these slightly, not far removed, but slightly removed from the city center shopping areas. But in all cases, those kinds of shopping areas raise questions about the social aspects of shopping and the impacts that large companies putting out of market smaller retailers and artisans in city centers will have. And I'm going to now turn to Pauline Sammarcelli. Pauline, as I said in my introduction, works for a mixed public-private organization in Paris that specifically looks at that question. How do we create a dynamic, innovative, and durable ecosystem for small commerce, in this case, in the city of Paris and surroundings? And how do we provide spaces for craftsmen and artisans in a high real estate city like Paris, keeping in mind that there are all these changes? So Pauline, I'll hand the floor over to you. I think it's quite interesting, the work that SEMAEST has undertaken since even before the pandemic, and I'll have some questions for you afterwards as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to be here today and to present the work that SEMAEST is doing in Paris, and also some of our thoughts on local business and what it brings to our city, especially in the crisis that we have been in the last year. So as you said, SEMAEST has been created quite a long time ago. The story began around 20 years ago. The 11th district of Paris, it was starting to be really congested, invaded by wholesalers. So at the time, the mayor of this district, he saw that the area was losing its human value, its human links. So he wanted to really reinvest the idea and bring back more traditional shops, food store and stuff. So he missioned SEMAEST to buy premises in the ground floors of the building and to rent them to independent, local, small businesses. Since then, we have set up around 650 small businesses in Paris. We have different ways of operating, but today I will just focus on one. It's what we have signed two innovative contracts with the city of Paris, which are called in French Vital Quartier and Contrat Paris Commerce. Basically, it gives us the opportunity to buy premises in some designated areas of Paris, to renovate them, and then to rent them to local businesses. Here you can see the map with the area where the city of Paris has requested us to protect shops. In yellow, you can see some of the older sectors, and in blue, the most recent ones. Here are some examples of neighborhoods and shops that we have set up. What we think is really interesting is when we set up a few shops in a street or in a close neighborhood, it really starts positive trends afterwards. There are also shops opening in private premises. Here you have some other examples. Obviously, we install all kinds of activities, bakeries, grocery stores, cheese shops, very important, and so on. But we do have a special support towards some activities, which are cultural businesses, especially independent bookstores, small publishing houses, art galleries, or record stores. which are increasingly threatened, especially in some neighborhoods, such as the Latin Quarter. For some of you might know it. Then you have arts and crafts. We have a special support toward those activities, and in fact, we have two big dedicated places, the Viaduc des Arts, the 12th district, and Cours de l'Industrie. And it houses over 100 workplaces for artists and craftspeople. And finally, we really want to encourage social and ecological projects, all kinds of projects that respect the environment and the people, such as short circuits, organic products, local manufacturing, circular economy, and so on. One of the key tools that we have created to encourage the creation of such activities is what we call testeur de commerce, which we could translate as a local shop tester. The idea is that entrepreneurs can rent it from 2 weeks up to 4 months, because in France, but I'm sure it's the same in other countries, it can be a bit hard to launch a new business. Obviously, you have to pre-finance the project, to secure a loan, to sign a long-term contract. So le testeur de commerce, it really helps entrepreneurs to try out their business in real conditions before committing themselves with more long-term contracts. Sometimes it can also help businesses that were started online to try out the brick and mortar and the real shop. And since the tester was created, over 50 entrepreneurs have tried their projects, and more than half of them then open the stores, permanent stores. And once again, what is interesting for us is several of these shop owners, they open a shop in the same street or in the really close area near the tester. So it really created a local ecosystem. We also created a program which is called COSTO. In English, it's the Compaction for Connected Stores, and in French, it means strong. So, as some of you have talked before, there was an increase in the use of e-commerce and new technologies. So the idea was to create a bridge between this digital sector and the more physical sector. For shop owners and craft people to start using digital technologies to improve their visibilities and to improve their business. Obviously, this past year with the COVID crisis and the lockdown, it has proven essential for them to have an online activity. During the crisis, the city of Paris asked us to support our tenants by giving them rent exemptions. So there was a financial support, as well as we also put a sort of coaching program for each tenant so that we can answer their questions and be there for them. So it was kind of the emergency response to the crisis. Nowadays, we need to think of the future and what to do if we want to encourage people to still create businesses, because obviously, given the economic situation, they might be a bit frightened to open a shop right now. So we want to offer a flexible solution for entrepreneurs. I'll present really quickly. The idea is for them to choose the duration of the lease, not a 3, 6, or 9 years lease. No entry fee, no door fee, no management fees. Also, we want to offer them progressive rent to facilitate the launch of the activity. And obviously, we will help them with communication and offer them membership of our COSTO program. I want to finish with what we call the positive externalities of trade. or the positive impact of trade. Obviously, well, we really think that trade is much more than just trade. When you set up a small business, when you set up a coffee shop, when you set up a bookstore in a popular area, you create more than business. You really create well-being, you create security, even eyes on the street, and you create human links. So especially nowadays, it's what we are all lacking. So it's really important for us to participate with this. In fact, we really want to ask ourselves, who do we want to buy our daily products from? And how do we want to create value in our neighborhood? Okay, I will finish like this. I've been a bit quick over everything, and if you have questions.
Merci, Pauline. Fascinating, and I think it really shows how an activist public authority can defend the idea of commerce, as Joost said, as an agora, as a social compact between citizens and shopkeepers and retailers. I've got many questions, and there's questions that I will get to after we hear from Giacomo that are in the Q&A. I have a quick question for you, Pauline.
Yeah.
One area that has been quite rigid when it comes to shops, retail spaces, and the use of those, beyond the rental contracts and those other constraints that you indicated, is zoning. So I wonder, City of Paris, has there been work looking at how these spaces are zoned and how the different uses that they might be put to are accounted for or not in the current zoning plans?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you are talking about, zoning.
Le plan d'occupation des sols. And there are specific uses for which a shop can, an area can have a food shop or not. It can have a retail shop or not. For a retail shop or a food shop, there may be a specific number of square meters that's available for that shop. There are rules and regulations in place in the urban code and in the zoning code, the plan d'occupation des sols, that indicates what can and can't be done in that space. Has that been a problem in trying to repurpose some of these spaces?
For us, it's the opposite. It's a way to help maintain independent businesses and to have protected areas. Like I said, for instance, with arts and crafts people, it really helps to have designated area which are we have to stay for arts and crafts people and so on. Mm. So we see it more as a helpful tool than a threat.
Okay.
From our perspective.
The other issue that came up that you didn't touch on is that there is, of course, an interest from commercial actors, commercial real estate actors, in being involved in downtown commerce. And in many cases, they'll work through larger brands, international brands, not the kind of services that or shops that you're working with. I wonder, has there been any interest from these larger commercial real estate players in becoming involved with the city of Paris in supporting these smaller shops in a more distributed fashion? Or is that still something that you don't see?
Yeah. Ourselves, we have worked with some real estate players to help them set up shops in their ground floor. So sometimes we are part of the process also to integrate these problematics.
Like in Bercy?
Yes, for instance, in Bercy and Caserne de Reuilly. I don't know if you know it, in the 12th district and so on.
Okay, so there is some convergence of those two. Okay, we'll get back to some of these questions about local shops, about the role of public authorities in defending local commerce, defending local artisans, and ensuring that that agora effect of local commerce, that essential social role of shops that Pauline and Joost talked about is kept in place. But before we go to that discussion, I'd like to turn to Giacomo Lozzi. He's, again, working with POLIS on urban freight, urban distribution, urban logistics. Giacomo, I'll give you the floor. Likewise, we'll have a few questions for you, and then we'll all come back for a set of panel questions that will be informed by the questions that you in the audience have posted in the Q&A. I'm sorry at the outset, I should have said there is a Q&A channel. Post your questions in there, but I see all of you are really familiar with these platforms, so keep posting those questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can afterwards. Giacomo, the floor is yours.
I was muted. Thanks, Philippe. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. On the screen, so I'll not see you for the moment. But thanks for this session. I think it's very important to discuss these topics with other stakeholders different from the transport sector, because in POLIS we work a lot on urban freight and logistics. But I'm glad to participate here because this enables us to broaden the scope of our work and to understand additional factors that are influencing the freight movements in the city. And I'll start my presentation highlighting some trends and challenges, although many of them have been already discussed before, so I'll be short on that. And then I will focus on the role of local authorities. In particular, I will provide some examples on how they are acting or reacting in some cases to these changes. It will be very short, but there will be time to discuss later. And finally, I have some food for thoughts that I would like to share with you and to address with the other speakers and the audience, because to be honest, I have more open questions than answers in this participation. So I will start mentioning that COVID may have changed our shopping habits permanently. What some researchers have found is that there are two main effects on the pandemic. Then I would like to hear from our colleagues that know certainly more about it. But one is the run shopping, so you go less shopping for leisure, but rather to buy what you need, and then you stay much less time in the shops. And the other one, of course, is the one we are all familiar with, is online shopping and e-commerce. And here I report statistics from Canada that I found very interesting in this graphic, to see that in-store shopping was quite flat in the last 5 years, whereas e-commerce was already having a increasing trend. And then you see at the beginning of the pandemic, e-commerce exploded while in-store shopping decreased. So I think what is interesting is that this trend is also confirmed by some statistics of the World Economic Forum that says that the growth was 10% per year worldwide before the pandemic. So talking about the revolution, I see this more as evolutionary path. And the scenario is also quite impressive, because the possibility is to have 78% increase in last mile delivery by 2030, which is strictly linked to this. So the impact of commerce on urban mobility is to have more deliveries that are more fragmented, because the parcels are smaller, not only for people, but also for shops with just-in-time deliveries. And they're unpredictable, because when you order with so many from online platforms, the suppliers cannot really foresee, although there are some algorithms at the moment, but cannot really foresee where the goods will go. And as I said, there's much more B2C. There's the fact that deliveries, including also instant deliveries, that is food deliveries mainly, is increasing, and the shops, the in-shop shopping is decreasing, might bring to the assumption that the let's say the shopping, the movements can be more efficient, because there are consolidated, whereas there's no clear answer to that. There's some research going on saying that it's not for granted that reduced trips to shops reduce the impact on mobility, and actually it seems that this is not, there's not a clear positive impact on that. Another aspect that I think it's important to address, and that has been widely discussed already, is the relationship between real estate and urban logistics. In the last decades, there has been a mounting pressure from real estate costs in the city. Although with COVID, we saw that there's a reversing trend. We have to understand if this is only for the short term or it's structural. But in general, this has brought to a so-called logistics sprawl, so the fact that warehouses are relocated outside of the city centers more and more, and this also increases the number of kilometers driven, of course. As an example, in Paris, this average distance has passed from 6 to 16 kilometers since 1970. So this is another issue that it's very important. In a project that is called LEAD, that is funded by the European Union, where we look at on-demand logistics, we have identified new systems, new agile delivery systems that are classifiable around locations, modes, and times. You see some of them that you might be more familiar with, like parcel lockers, pickup points, but there are also some more futuristic or not yet spread. But it's very important to keep this into consideration when we think about future solutions. At the same time, many of them has not been included in the plans as it was discussed before in the urban plans. So this is something also to discuss. So the role and initiatives of local authorities, going to this part of the discussion, it's very important to frame it considering that we are shifting more from traffic management to urban space management when we talk about mobility and accessibility, as Isabelle was mentioning before. So local authorities manage a scarce space, and in this case, they have a leverage that they can use when it comes to allocating modes, because they can do it through space allocation or pricing, but this is something that directly influences the mobility patterns and improves or decreases the accessibility of goods and services and places. So coming back to the real estate and urban logistics, for example, in Paris, there has been a redefinition of some logistics spaces in the city. This is happening in general, but I'm bringing this example of the logistics hotels where multi-purpose areas have been trialed, are now starting to take more place in Paris, but also in other cities where you have warehousing, but also retailers and also offices in the same space. And also another way of integrating destinations of use is vertical real estate, but also underground with parkings that could be used in the night by residential cars and in the daytime by logistics operators, or also brownfields and requalifying areas of the city that are abandoned and can be used for logistics purposes. Another way of rethinking the spaces, as it was mentioned before, pedestrianization. This is the case of Oslo, where the shops recorded 10% growth in visits after cars were banned. This is, of course, something that refers to the pre-pandemic periods, but as also Isabelle mentioned, this in general, shops then after these measures are implemented, are happy. But also referring still to her points, it's important, you see here an area in Brussels that is also pedestrianized, but where there's access for suppliers to enter the area and deliver their goods, because of course this is very important for the shops. And at the same time, they benefit from the less private cars that they have to compete with for parking. Another initiative, quite different, but still how local authorities are entering into the field, is the buy local initiatives. So substantially, in practice, how the cities, the local authorities can provide a support for local shops to improve their omni-channel distribution, in particular through e-commerce, and also provide at the same time supporting sustainable deliveries. This is the case of Groningen in the Netherlands, but there are also other public-led initiatives in this regard. I have something that I would like to share with you, but I'm really open to discussion, because for many of these points I don't have enough knowledge, but I would like to throw it there for everybody to share your knowledge and opinions. For example, when we talk about pop-up shops where you can pick up your parcel, but also try in the dressing room what you have ordered online, and finally receive your product at home, I wonder sometimes what is the difference from a traditional shop in this case, or in the case of the local e-commerce platforms, or like online platforms that in general provide this possibility of delivering from local shops or local supermarkets. Why this wouldn't happen then directly from local distribution centers instead of adding an extra step in the distribution, in the supply chain? So to conclude, and mentioning something that has been around for a while, is one point that I would like to address also is the space for logistics in inner city. Who pays the bill, in the sense that we see that for micro distribution centers, for example, there's a business case when the facilities are provided for free by the municipality, but this is not the case when they have to pay a rent. So is this something that we want to encourage and to see if we see logistics as a public service or not, or in some cases only? Then what is the role of the 15 minutes concept, the 15-minute city concept? So basically the idea of having access to goods, leisure, and services within 15 minutes walking or cycling or with public transport. This, of course, means also a shift from a monocentric to polycentric distribution model. So what are the implications for deliveries and how this can be integrated into the logistics plans of the cities? Then what is the difference between a big city like Madrid, Rome, even Brussels, with small and medium-sized cities that are the majority in Europe? Is this a different paradigm that we have to adopt there, or is it a bit the same approach? And then a bit more general, but it's always welcome to discuss how to nudge both online and offline customers' behavior. Can they use only the private cars, for example, when they go shopping, or there are alternatives? And finally, in general, how to ensure that all the solutions we propose address sustainability, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from a social and economic one altogether. So this was my brief presentation. I hope there are not too many questions, but I would like to discuss with you about all this. Thanks.
Grazie mille. There are many questions. I have one comment and a question, and then we're going to get to the audience questions that people have been posting all along. So the comment is you were asking rather, what's the difference between a pop-up store where you can, or a pop-up service where you can try and buy in a regular shop? I think, Giacomo, when you said that, it triggered something in my mind that may represent an unbundling of the shop experience. So shop owners, retail shop owners select goods that they want to sell in their shop, and then people come to their shop and they know what they want, or they try what they want, if it's food, or if it's clothes or something else. Here, what you're talking about is actually letting multiple shop curators, if you will, sell goods that individuals can go to one place to try across a number of different shops. So you split the trying function in a shop from the I'm going to select what I think a type of customer might want. That's interesting, because that is a difference from what we've seen in traditional shops, that it goes more to this multi-channel funnel, if you will. A number of different retailers can provide goods that people can try on or try in one location. That was a comment. The question I have for you, Giacomo, is as you're talking, I'm thinking there is a real structural issue and asymmetry here. Real estate in urban areas, anywhere, or especially in urban areas, is rare and it's priced. So people make decisions on the price of real estate. Urban road space is rare, but is not priced. So equally, distribution logistics channels make decisions based on something that is free, congested sometimes. So there's a time penalty, but free. Pickup and drop-off space, the curb space, is rare, but is not priced. So there is no direct cost to a Amazon delivery, a UPS, a Colissimo delivery, a DPD delivery from picking up and dropping off, except for the driver time and potentially the number of packages they have to take off. So I think it seems that there's a real pricing misalignment here, that we price something that is extremely rare at a very high level, and that's the urban real estate that is occupied by these shops. And then we create a free resource for everyone to use, including passengers, that may lead to some of the overuses. It certainly doesn't allow for some of these return deliveries to be priced accordingly. So Giacomo, is that something that you see as an issue when you talk to people in your logistics circles and the research and the networks that you're animating through POLIS?
Yeah, no, indeed, it's a total distortion. And we are also starting working in an integrated way with the access dimension of POLIS, so merging urban freight and access to look at curbside management and how a dynamic and flexible way of managing it can help also adjusting the price and adjusting the usage based on the time of the day or on other different factors for which we need more data, but it's another discussion. And in general, if you talk to logistics operators, what they say is that they take into account a certain number of fines that they will get over the year and the internalized cost. But this is much less than using alternatives, sometimes even pay a permit to access low emissions on. So there's clearly a distortion there, and so indeed, what is the value of the street, and what is the logistics operations that we want to consider? We during the pandemic we said logistics is public service, but is it 1 hour delivery of a pair of shoes a public service, or what is a public service? It's difficult to get into this discussion because then can have thousands of nuances there, but it's really important that we put some boundaries, or at least based on the data we have, we try to nudge a bit this and to regulate this explosion, because as I also read in the Q&A, it's not that we have to accommodate, since this is the trend, we have to accommodate it. We can also try to reverse the trend if it makes sense.
Or channel it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a question that is in the Q&A, and I'd like for Joost and Isabelle to take a first stab at answering that. And that is relating to the way in which platforms will interact with other forms of retail. So platforms intrinsically seek monopoly. That's true. Can local retail coexist with them? Or even, I would suggest, not just local retail, but even regional retail resist with them. And realistically speaking, what are the chances that the retail sector has the tools they need to resist from submitting to these global platforms, the platform whose name I will not say here, but starts in A and finishes in N, being the example given. So Joost and Isabelle, what tools and opportunities do local and regional retailers have against these large platform actors that naturally will seek to monopolize channels?
If I can start, unless you want to
Please.
start. Okay, so let's start with the first note of optimism. The retail sector is extremely innovative. So the way we're selling products is not the same now that it used to be 50 years ago. So I think we've really been through different changes and different phases. And we're just in a new phase where you have more reliance on digital means, including platform. So that was my first remark. I think also we need to make a difference between e-commerce and platform, because it's not because that you're using digital tools that you are using a platform. There are three types of digital means pretty much. One is it's manufacturers that sell this product directly. So you have your favorite brand for sneakers and you go directly on their brand. Then you also have the retail, so the one that actually using the logistic, combining all together and sending their own products, but that would be another digital service to a brick and mortar approach. So the same thing that's been happening, for instance, during the last year, where you could do your grocery shopping online, but you could also decide not to go online and to go and see your brick and mortar. The last trend is definitely this platform where it's actually pretty much a service given to smaller players to sell their own products to a consumer. So it's really a smaller enterprise doing direct selling to the consumer. This is happening, and a bit of a disclosure: the AN company is a direct member of EuroCommerce. And to be honest, it is disruptive because it is definitely being consumer driven, and it's really placing convenience at its top necessity. So it is they are winning because they actually are being convenient. You can buy whenever and whatever you want, which is something that traditional retailers can't do it for different reasons. One being social law. You can't be open 24 hours when you're brick and mortar. I think what we can say is that for SMEs, there will be different type of consumption patterns. You have different consumer group, and different consumer will go on platform where others will maybe just prefer local shops. I think that's one thing. It's you have the innovation to actually compete. You also have the consumer that are driving maybe resistance, so to say. And secondly, we have this trend that we call the unicorn versus the phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
And and you also have this opportunity by platform to also reinvent themselves, but also take the most of those little shop, by providing them a platform to provide their own selling.
Yep.
I think that's what I wanted to say. I hope I
Joost,
was clear enough.
Perfect. Joost, any views on the differentiation between the online agora and the real life agora that you alluded to? I think you're muted, Joost. I think you're muted, Joost. One thing you might find is if you refresh again, sometimes that will take the mute off. Joost, we're going to come back to you because we're coming into the last 10 minutes of the talk, so I'll come back to Joost on that. I want to ask another question to Pauline, and this is a question that came up again in the Q&A. Lockdown showed us that to lock up people at home, we don't need to lock their doors. We just have to shut down retail. If the number of outlets goes down, what changes can we expect in urban life? Now, I know, Pauline, that you're working to keep that from happening, but what are the risks if you are not successful or not as successful as you wish to create that urban retail fabric?
I mean, I think we have all seen it when the restaurants and the bar reopened last week, for a few weeks ago. Everyone was so happy to have life back in the streets, back in the city. So obviously, if we fail and there are no more local stores, streets will be more empty. There will be less well-being in the neighborhood. I think even security issues because, for instance, at night or even during the day in some areas to have shop open, like I say in my presentation, it's people on the streets. It's kind of a security, you know. But I want to be hopeful that we will succeed, and we have obviously seen a movement from people to support their local businesses, to shop in the small businesses during lockdown. For instance, we have seen it with bookstores that had to be closed during the first lockdown, and people were buying vouchers to be used when they reopened. So there was kind of a movement towards local businesses.
I think, Pauline, just to follow up with that question, there is an expectation that certainly in the most popular in terms of retail neighborhoods in a city like Paris, that return will happen. There may be more uncertainty as to whether that return will come as strongly in neighborhoods that aren't as popular. So I wonder if the city of Paris or if the SEMAEST is considering banking some of this commercial real estate or intervening in these real estate markets to preempt certain uses or to otherwise guide the reallocation of those shop spaces to ensure that those spaces are used for local shops and not for other purposes.
You mean, for example, in areas where there are a lot of offices or touristic places?
Not too much interest initially in bringing up certain type of retail shops, and where the risk is that those spaces are lost for good, or at least for the cycle of a lease that might be 3 years or 6 years for retail use.
At the moment, it's not the areas that we operate on. We operate, as you have seen of the map, more on the city center and then popular areas. But obviously, at the end of our current contract and with the next contracts with the city of Paris, it will be something that is taking into account to select the new areas where we operate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Joost, welcome back. I hope if you can unmute yourself, you can go back to that question. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Joost. Your microphone doesn't seem to be working again. You may want to go into your settings and make sure that if you've come back, you have the right microphone set. And while you're doing that, I can see that your microphone still isn't unmuted. I'm going to ask a question to Giacomo and then to some of the others. And that is that typically retailers or shops have to operate within a heavily regulated and a taxed framework. Now, that's not the case with e-commerce platforms. Do you see a disparity, for example, in the role, and Isabelle and Joost will take up on that. Do you see a disparity in that treatment, and do you see a role specifically for local authorities in redressing that asymmetry?
Well, yeah, I think Isabelle might have more answers on that in terms of local authorities. That's something we're really trying to figure out also when we, especially I think this, when we look at the behavior of the shoppers, because it affects mobility, but we don't have a direct control on it, especially in the transport departments. So what is important, I think, is that local authorities first of all have a interdepartmental discussion on this with the commerce department, for example. In terms of control over the national or European laws, what we can do as a network is to stress the importance of it and the impacts on urban mobility. But I don't think a local authority can influence the regulation of the biggest member of EuroCommerce.
Isabelle, not the biggest member.
No, sorry.
Go ahead, Isabelle, and we're going to hopefully get Joost when he comes back in.
So first of all, EuroCommerce is composed by national associations and direct companies. So the biggest members are the national associations in terms of voting right as well. So just on the side. But the thing is that I think it's true. What's happening is that we need a level playing field between all of the players. And it's not only between brick and mortar and platforms, but it's also between the requirement requested to European economic operator and the requirement of the products entering the EU market, ensuring that we have the same requirement for everyone. And here, this level playing field is something that we're pushing for, should it be in terms of safety, in terms of fiscal incentive, and so on and so forth. It is very, and it's very hard for the local authorities, but for public authority in general to help that, because, well, it's a matter of compliance and enforcement. So public authorities needs to help the smaller player that are on the platform complying to the different requirements. And I'm taking something quite technical, but very important for us, which is waste. The private sector, the producer, so whoever puts a product on the market, so your manufacturer, your retailer, you pay a fee for the product to be collected and sorted so it can be used in the circular economy. Product being imported through platform, so, and not only, and Alibaba being one of them, it also starts with an A.
Also with an A.
Yeah. The products being imported directly to the consumer, there's no one that actually takes pays those fees, and it's a real problem, because it means that the traditional brick and mortar not only have to pay for their own products, but they also have to pay for the products or the packaging of the products that been imported. And here it's a real matter of how do you enforce that those products that arrive in the European market are just compliant with those requirements, and let alone all of the problem regarding safety of the products that we import from those platforms. The only problem is, how do you help the companies that want to do good to make it feasible? I go back to my example on paying the waste fees for the extended producer responsibility. It's close to local level. So it means that a small SME that is in Italy that wants to sell his product in Austria, in Germany, in France, needs to comply to all of the different EPR fees, which is a matter of registering for each of the EPR, and it's around 2,500 euros per item. That is not possible. So I think it's ensuring that you have enforcement, and that I'm just calling for more money for the ministers that are doing that, and also ensuring that it's easy. And having a one-stop shop, having one entity where we need to comply to those fiscal will help. Then it's also the matter of harmonizing the digital approach, but I think it's beyond what we can discuss today. But I agree, it's a challenge.
There was a point made in the Q&A that the waste is also an issue for local authorities, not from the product itself, but from the packaging. And so there is this packaging waste that local authorities have a responsibility to cover the costs of, that the retailers and or the manufacturers don't. And so there is an issue there. Joost, are you able to unmute? Oh, perfect. You're able to unmute your microphone. So Joost, you will get almost.
Can you hear me? This is the hop in. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
The hop in classroom is not being very kind to me. No, quickly coming back to you in terms of business models. One very quick point is in terms of the comparison you made a while ago, Philip, with the United States in terms of retail, the business model. I think it's very important to be aware that on average, there's 10 times more square meters of retail per person in the United States than there is in continental Europe. So of course, there have been, much more significant issues with redundancies, oversaturation of the market. Basically, there is too much retail in the United States. They build too much of it. It's a very different situation in continental Europe. UK is somewhat in between. In terms of business models, and I think there, as we discussed a lot about the omnichannel model. I think that for us, for our members, the main issue is the level playing field. And I saw questions from Miles in the Q&A. I think there is, certainly when it comes to taxation and when this comes to environmental regulation, there's a disbalance between what brick and mortar retail and retail property owners have to deal with and have to comply with, and what pure players, online players, have to do. Taxation is, of course, one of the most important ones because it has a direct impact on your margins, and margins are low everywhere. Certainly in retail is a low margin business. And there I think something at some point the changes will have to be made. I think it will. Let's see. Of course, it's not a European, or it's more a national competence than a European competence. France is a good example. I'll give you one example of this, which kind of indicates what the dish is. In France, you have a tax. It's called TASCOM. The taxe sur surface commerciale, which is applicable to every commercial service above 5,000 square meters. So rather, that's quite significant tax. But of course, and this was also brought for discussion today, if you say that, for e-commerce logistics, warehouses are increasingly becoming like shops, they of course would have to be subjected to that tax too. Because for the moment they're not paying any tax. In fact, pure players in France are paying hardly any taxes at all. So of course, that creates, of course, it has an enormous impact on, the sustainability of the sector, of, the viability. And that's not to say that retailers, are opposed or something like that against e-commerce. Not at all. You see the evolution of the omnichannel models was there and has significantly pushed through last year. But it's just saying, well, if you want to, if you cannot compete on a level playing field, it's going to be hard to. Already specifically in a pandemic, or obviously, or in the fallout phase of a pandemic. So I think that's really an important thing for. I think there also what you will see in the future. I'm expecting this. I mean, the EU has put forward, is going to put forward very strict environmental targets, certainly when it comes to climate, change and emission reductions, etc.
Yep.
Do not make these targets as EU and as sectors. Imagine in 10 years. Well, then it's quite likely that the targets will only become more strict, because it's very unlikely they will become less strict, because the climate change problem is not going to change, and actually it's an exponential problem, unfortunately. So of course, these targets, they will of course have their impact on, for example, if you think of delivery of goods to home, and the way that has been going until now, and will likely have to change in the future. So these things, of course, and that will have an impact on the business model of pure player e-commerce. It also has an impact certainly on the business model of retail property owners and how they work. And there was a question there in the out of town part, and the pollution that's caused by cars driving there. Yeah, it's a very important issue. Certainly, when scope 3 emissions, as those are called, are for the moment generally, let's say, allocated to the property owners. So when their investors look at their portfolio and look at their, ESG or environmental performance, saying, well, it's pretty nice, the building, but you're having a lot of emissions there coming from you. What are you going to do about that? So, and my members are very much, okay, how can we address it? How can we improve that? Their investors are putting them under pressure. The investors will increasingly put the retailers under pressure, saying, well, it's all very nice, but you have a lot of shops out of town or this, and they are not so good environmentally, not performing so well. What is your answer? So I think there also that will create a lot of an external pressure that will put business models and that we all have to have to deal with and have to implement and there's a lot of things already ongoing and a lot of new models being thought about, both in the retail property side, certainly also on the retailer side.
Yeah.
So I think that. And I'll leave that at that. I'm glad that I could
Yeah,
that it
I was
works again.
just about to say, I'm really glad you were able to come back and connect, and
Yes,
you've made
yes.
some really good points there. We're 3 minutes over the end of the session. I am going to give you each the opportunity to give a one-word answer to a question that is in the Q&A. That is that we are looking at local retailers facing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: lockdown, recession, e-commerce, and teleworking. My question to you, one-word answer, is: are you hopeful that there is a good future for retail outside of large shopping centers? Pauline, that's the core of your work. Are you hopeful that Paris will remain a vibrant shopping retail city?
Yes, as I said
Good.
before, hopeful.
Yes. Giacomo, are you hopeful?
Yes, but depends on a lot of work and not on case.
Work that you'll have to do partly. Giacomo. Joost, are you hopeful?
Always.
Excellent. An optimist like that. Isabelle, are you hopeful?
Obviously,
Perfect.
it goes without saying.
Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you, Joost. Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Victoire, who's been in the background. And thank you as well to Pedro, who helped organize all this. Fascinating discussion. I thought an hour and a half would be a long time. It turns out that it's not nearly enough time. So I look forward to continuing this discussion at some point later. Have a good day and go shopping.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.